You've been called negative before. Dramatic, maybe. Someone who can't just let things be good without quietly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Someone who, in the middle of a perfectly fine Tuesday, feels a vague, sourceless dread. Like the universe owes you a consequence for how okay things have been lately. Someone who hears, "I need to talk to you," and has already rehearsed the breakup, the firing, the diagnosis, all before the other person has pulled up a chair. And when people tell you to relax, to be more positive, to just enjoy the moment, a part of you wants to. A part of you is genuinely exhausted by your own brain. But another part of you thinks, you don't know what I know. I've been blindsided before. I won't be again. This video isn't here to tell you to think differently. It's not going to hand you a gratitude journal and wish you luck. It's here to explain what's actually happening inside you and why it makes complete, logical, evolutionary sense. Let's begin where no motivational speaker wants to start, with the fact that optimism, for most of human history, was a liability. Think about the people who came before us, not our grandparents, not even their grandparents. Go back further. The ones who looked at the dark edge of a forest and thought, it's probably fine. They didn't last long. The ones who felt a chill, who assumed danger before they had proof, who stayed alert even when nothing was visibly wrong, those people survived. They made it through another night. They had children. Those children had children. And somewhere down a very long line of cautious, hypervigilant, assumed the worst human beings, you showed up. Your brain did not arrive broken, it arrived prepared. Neuroscientists call it the negativity bias, the deeply wired tendency to register threats faster, process them more intensely, and remember them far longer than positive events. Brain imaging studies have confirmed it. Negative stimuli consistently generate larger and more sustained neural responses than positive ones. A harsh word hits harder than a compliment heals. One bad interaction at work lingers longer than 10 good ones. A single moment of betrayal rewrites years of trust. Your nervous system isn't overdramatic. It's doing exactly what millions of years of evolution designed it to do. The problem, the only problem, is that we no longer live in a world of predators and famine and tribes where a wrong move meant death. But the brain didn't get that memo. So it applies the same ancient, high-alert threat detection machinery to unanswered texts, to a slightly unusual tone in an email, to a quiet car ride with someone you love. The forest is gone. The feeling that something is lurking in it never left. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because always expecting the worst is not one single thing. It wears different faces, shows up in different bodies, runs on different fears. And understanding which version lives in you is the first real step toward anything changing. The first type is the defensive pessimist. This person doesn't expect the worst because they're miserable. They expect the worst because it works. Defensive pessimism was first formally identified by psychologists Julie Norham and Nancy Cantor in the late 1980s, and what they found challenged everything the self-help industry wanted to believe. Defensive pessimism is a legitimate cognitive strategy where a person deliberately lowers their expectations before a high-stakes situation, and then mentally walks through every possible way things could go wrong. Not to spiral into despair, to prepare. The student who spends the night before an exam imagining every question they won't know and then quietly solving them one by one isn't sabotaging themselves, they're training. The employee who lies awake before a presentation, mentally scripting every awkward pause and difficult question, then shows up and performs with unusual precision, that's defensive pessimism doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Research has shown these individuals often outperform their more optimistic counterparts in high-pressure environments, precisely because they've already navigated the disaster in their head. To everyone watching from the outside, this person looks like they can never enjoy anything. On the inside, they're running extremely effective risk management software. The anxiety isn't the enemy, it's the fuel. The second type is the catastrophizer. This is a different animal. This is the person who receives a slightly unusual message from their doctor's office, just asking to reschedule, and spends the next 6 hours convinced something is seriously wrong. Who notices a new, very small mole, and by midnight has already drafted a version of what they'd want to say to the people they love. Who gets a, "Hey, can we talk?" text, and doesn't sleep. The catastrophizer isn't unintelligent. They're not fragile. They're hypervigilant. And hypervigilance, in the vast majority of cases, has a history behind it. Research consistently links catastrophizing thought patterns to early environments where unpredictability was the norm. Childhoods where moods in the house shifted without warning. Homes where the quiet before the storm was a real, recurring thing. Where learning to sense danger early was genuinely adaptive, because being blindsided was genuinely painful. The catastrophizer's brain learned one of the most logical lessons a brain can learn. If something bad is possible, assume it's coming, because at least then you're ready. The suffering of anticipation hurts less than the suffering of surprise. The brain chose the version of pain it could control. So now, sitting in a perfectly ordinary Thursday, when a what if enters the mind, the brain doesn't let it pass. It grabs it, follows it, builds a whole architecture of disaster around it. Not because the person wants to suffer, but because the brain is doing its job, the job it was given a long time ago. The third type doesn't fear a specific bad outcome. They fear the space between knowing and not knowing. Psychologists have a name for this: intolerance of uncertainty, and it's one of the most quietly pervasive, most underdiagnosed engines of chronic anxiety in modern life. For these people, it's not really about the worst-case scenario itself. It's about the ambiguity, the I don't know yet, the waiting room, the unanswered question. When the outcome is unclear, the brain doesn't leave the space empty. It fills it, and it fills it with danger. This is why, for someone with high intolerance of uncertainty, a certain bad outcome can genuinely feel more tolerable than a good outcome that hasn't been confirmed. Certainty, even terrible certainty, feels like solid ground. The unknown feels like falling. This person doesn't catastrophize for pleasure. They catastrophize because it's the brain's attempt to resolve the unbearable tension of not knowing. If I imagine the worst and prepare for it, then at least I'm standing somewhere. At least the waiting is over. So, where does all of this come from? How does a person arrive here? For some, it's neurological, a more sensitive nervous system, a lower threshold for threat detection, a temperament that was always going to register the world more intensely. This isn't a flaw. Some of history's most careful thinkers, most rigorous scientists, most empathic caregivers have run on exactly this wiring. But for many others, it's learned, and the learning started early. Think about what a child's brain does when the environment is unpredictable. When a parent's moods arrive without pattern, warmth and coldness in no logical sequence. When home is a place where the good times feel fragile, where you learn not to get too comfortable because something can always shatter. When, over and over again, the thing you hoped for didn't happen, and the thing you feared did. The child's brain is not passive in these experiences. It observes, it models. It builds a predictive system based on what it keeps seeing. And if what it keeps seeing is, good things don't stay, bad things arrive without warning, and hope is a setup, then the brain updates its operating system accordingly. It stops predicting good outcomes, not as punishment, not as pathology, as logic. The pessimism that developed wasn't a mistake in your programming. It was the correct output for the inputs you received. It protected you. It may have even saved you. And for that younger version of you that built this armor, there is nothing to be ashamed of. The tragedy isn't that it formed. The tragedy is that it often stays, long after the environment that created it is gone. The armor stays on indoors, in the middle of summer, with people who are not your enemies. And there is a cost to that, not a moral cost. This isn't about being a difficult person, or failing at happiness, or spreading bad energy into the universe, but a physiological, deeply real cost that accumulates quietly over years. Living in a state of perpetual anticipated threat means your nervous system never fully stands down. The cortisol doesn't stop. The muscles stay slightly braced. The sleep is light because some part of the brain is still on watch. You arrive at events already depleted, having emotionally survived the disaster that didn't happen 3 days in advance. You've grieved losses that never came. You've rehearsed conversations that were never had. You've mourned versions of your life that only ever existed in your head. And relationships absorb this in ways that are hard to see from the inside. The person who can never quite celebrate, who follows good news with, yes, but, who loves deeply, genuinely, fiercely, but holds a fraction of themselves back. Because experience taught them that closeness has a cost. That the more something matters, the more there is to lose. That caring fully and expecting the worst cannot coexist. So one of them has to go. And caring fully is the riskier choice. The people around you may not understand why you can't just be there when things are good. But you know. You've been fully there before, and you remember what it felt like when the floor disappeared. Here is what I am not going to offer you at the end of this video. A 5-step plan, a morning routine, a list of affirmations, a suggestion to challenge your negative thoughts, as if they were strangers you haven't been living with for decades. That's not what this is. What research actually points to, what makes a genuine, sustainable difference, is something quieter and far more demanding than positive thinking. It's recognition. It's the ability to watch your own brain run its patterns and say, I see you. I know what you're doing. I know why you learned this, and I'm going to choose something slightly different right now. Not eliminating the pessimism, not replacing it with forced optimism that your nervous system will immediately reject, but developing enough space between the trigger and the spiral to make a choice. The defensive pessimist learning to ask, does this specific situation actually require a survival plan, or am I applying a template from a different life? The catastrophizer catching the first what if and deciding, consciously, how far to follow it. The person intolerant of uncertainty practicing, slowly, imperfectly, staying in the not knowing just a little longer before the brain demands resolution. None of this is fast. None of it is clean. And none of it means you have to become someone who greets every morning with enthusiasm and believes everything will work out. It just means that the armor, the brilliant, heavy, exhausting armor your brain built to keep you safe, doesn't have to be welded shut. You can take it off. Not because the world is now safe, but because you are. You were taught to expect the worst. That lesson did its job. It kept you standing. But you're allowed to decide what you want to carry forward and what you've already carried far enough.